talking about the connecting one. So there's actually multiple parts to the connecting. So first one is the entry connect. Okay, so the first one, so the entry connector is this part here. So this portion here. So this, every letter has like different entry points that you can do, but some of them have specific locations where it's like more optimal, or that's the only option that they have. And you can usually tweak them to a certain extent. So for example, letter A is one of those letters that are open for connecting on the entry part because it stands alone like this, right? Normally, it doesn't have this stroke here, right? So you can connect it from the bottom. So for example, if a line was connecting from the bottom, it could connect like this. So this is the bottom one. Then there's also the middle, right? Like if it was connected in the middle of the letter. And then another one is if it was at the top, right? But it's open for this letter. But for some other letters, for example, like letter B, if we did a letter B, we can choose for the entry. It almost has like a default entry, which is at the bottom, right? Or it could be kind of like a middle one, right? Like it could be like that, where it's sort of in the middle. It's not, it's certainly not coming in from the top. And I'm just talking about like right here in the top, okay? Middle, sorry, I'm trying to add the words here. And then top. Some letters though have like an entry point that's at the top. So for example, the letter V, right? Because the starting point of it is right at the top, no matter what you do, right? Like the positioning of it. So this is position of where you can connect the letter. And then, of course, there's also the exit ones. So generally, the most common one is the bottom one, right? Like this part here is where you want to connect the letters. So this is the bottom. And then there's the middle one, for example, like the letter S, right? Like it's kind of in the middle of the letter. And then there's the letters that are at the top, like the V again. So the V sort of comes from this top portion and ends at the top as well here. So depending on the location of these entry and exit points, that kind of determines how you can connect the letters, right? And so in terms of the connecting lines, there's also a couple of them. There's the ones that go kind of bottom to bottom. Actually, let's go to bottom, from bottom to the top first. So bottom to top. And you can do it two ways, you know, like it could curve this way, or it could curve the other way, or it could even be just like more straight like this, or it could go middle to top. Which is somewhere like here to here, or here to here, or like a more straight one, kind of just going this way. So if you kind of envision some of the letters that would kind of pair with a connector, and I'll do some samples of that as we go along. These are like the general size or like the style of connecting. Of course, you can be more obvious later on, like you can lower it or create more bounce to them. Bouncing has a lot to do with how your connecting lines look. Bouncing is like when letters kind of float around a little bit. So it definitely has that. And then of course there's the bottom to bottom connectors. And they look really similar in the top to top one, because it's pretty much like this line here. And this one from top to top would be just higher this way. And this is mostly just like the lowercase here. So, and of course there's also the option of just not connecting them at all, right? Like some letters, if they're really too hard to connect, I would just leave them on their own. So let's do a couple of the bottom to top ones. So if we were to connect some bottom to top, okay, for example, like an A, right? Like we have a letter A here, and then connecting all the way up to say a letter X, which is one that starts from here, right? Normally an X would have that line. Then you'll have a connector that goes all the way to the top, right? Because if I put an A and an X together, you've got like a bottom one and a sort of middle to top connector, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I would connect it with this line here. And most of the time, if you find like it's really hard to connect these lines, then you would just like take a pencil, like work on them first individually like this, like look at where the connecting parts would be, then to add those elements in. Because sometimes if you kind of just force it along, then it gets it's funky, right? Like especially for example, like a letter E. The letter E is a middle connector. Middle in terms of like the starting point of it goes to the bottom, but when you're trying to connect it to another E, it tends to have like a weird connector, right? Like this one. So it tends to bend the connector a little bit too much sometimes, you know, if we wanted to be conscious of exactly how we wrote it. So sometimes I would change the shape of the, I change the shape of the bottom part of the E instead so that it doesn't look so crooked, you know, like that connector bit there.
There you go.
Yeah, something like that. Or I would even like lower it even further. That way I have more room. And then I would start the E a little bit further and almost like fake that connection though. That, do you guys see that one? Make it longer. And then I start a little bit further away, and then I'll let that downstroke kind of finish that little bit of the connecting part there. And then if we had say something like that's a top to top or bottom to bottom, you know, for example, if we had like two letter A's, and maybe let's do bottom to bottom first. A, we're starting at the bottom, we want to connect it lower, then you could have it like a lower connection, or if you wanted to make it a little bit middle, then you can also do that. That's the flexibility of these letters that don't have a specific entry, or go all the way to the top to make like a higher connecting part. And these are actually parts of the stylistic parts of your calligraphy style, right? Because you know, if you like these extra longer, you know, connecting lines, it will affect the overall look of your style eventually. Like how long they would be. So, you know, for example, if you wanted the letter A to start having like even lower tails like this, right? Or like letter M's, for example, another one that's like bottom to middle. I know a lot of calligraphers play around with the M, like kind of like this. really low. I'm sorry, I'm at the bottom of the screen. Sorry, guys. I'm like checking the screen, checking my writing, and like,
A lot.
yeah. Like, it happens to me all the time on the phone, because like when I'm doing the live on my phone, the screen is so narrow, like,
Yeah.
so like sometimes I'm like halfway through my word already and no one has told me that I'm off the screen. And because they can't tell me, it's like a live video, I can only look at the
Right.
comments. And sometimes my camera is higher up on the, oh yeah, it's embarrassing.
Right.
But anyway, yeah. And so also I find that sometimes you don't need to connect, right? Like, for example, like letter K, if your letter K kind of looks like this, it has a very clear connector. But for example, if your letter K ends up becoming more like open like this, then it forces your letters to be a little bit wider than it needs to be, like in terms of spacing wise. So it's okay also to just like leave them alone and not connect them. And I find that true, especially for letters, for example, like letter X, where the connecting part here is rather awkward. So I would like, because, well, letter X's are typically not very common anyway, I would just leave them alone when I need to write them. Or I would actually like cognizantly like make the bottom part here like extra big, and that way when I close it up this way I can continue with like the connector that's like similar to how I've written it before, so now it's not so obvious, but then I had to make sure I thought of that before I started the X's.
Do you tend to pencil a lot more first just to get your spacing when you're doing like group? Do you tend to pencil more when you're like designing and getting your
Designing
group?
yeah especially when I'm creating a new style, or when I'm like doing like invitations or something where like the names and stuff need to be more perfected. Like obviously I don't do that for envelopes.
Right.
Take forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely pencil marks have been like a good lifesaver for me.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the letters that people often tell me that they have issues with connecting is letter O, because just like the way the O is shaped, and there's a couple of different ways we can go around it, right? The entry part is not the problem, because generally the O's don't really need that extra flourish, right? Like you can have one like this, for example, but it's open, like it doesn't belong to the letter. This part, at least, the entry part is fine. The exit is where it is hard, because now it's a top exit letter, like the top part here. There's also ways you could make it kind of middle, which is like this, right? So now it's a middle letter, and then a middle exit letter, and then you can also make it to the bottom, which is like this. Now it's closer to the bottom, and but that of course depends on how you've like created your letter shapes, right? So each style of this letter O has now posed a different like level of complexity to connect to another letter. For example, like the word OR, right? Like or tends to be a rather problematic letter because of just the letter O and connecting it, because the R is a bottom connector, right? So how are you going to connect this to this? Looks terrible. So generally I find whenever I have a top O, I wouldn't really connect it to the R, because it tends to, when I do force it, it tends to shorten my spacing too much of these two letters. It's a bit awkward.
Right.
Sometimes people don't even know that's an R anymore. So I end up usually separating them, just keeping them close, or I kind of cheat a little bit and make it at least to the middle. Like I do that connector to the middle, because now I have enough space in between these two, because not all the time can I go all the way down to make this, because now this letter O doesn't look like this O in my style, right? So this looks like a different O style altogether. So it really depends on kind of the style that you're trying to keep for your shape of your O. You can tease it down a little bit. For example, for this one, I would even do it maybe smaller. That way it still looks like it belongs to this style, you know?
Yeah.
But not too much like this where it's all the way to the bottom. Yeah. So OR is such a common letter combination, happens all the time, but it has like that complexity just because of the shape of it. But ironically, whenever you have got a top to top one, it makes it easy because now you can just go straight to that letter. So for example, like an O and a V, for example, like you can go all the way up. You can even, if you did your V was, your O starts at the very top there, you can continue along in that way. That would also be the same actually if you had like a V to V, then it just has that same connector, and you just want to make sure that when you have these connector lines that you keep relatively around the same width, to keep like at least it's easier on the eyes, versus having them like too tight. Of course, like I am all about authenticity in writing, like because it's a handwriting style, a modern calligraphy handwriting style, so it's hard to like break those habits of like having minimal changes and some change spacing differences. That's part of the style, obviously. So don't be too intimidated by like, oh, I'm lacking consistency of it or something. Another one of those that because of this letter O being such an issue is like letter O and letter P. So letter P is a bottom connector or a medium, a middle, sorry, not medium. What am I talking about? Middle connector, right? Because it's right here or here. So sometimes it can get like a bit wonky to connect again. So just giving you guys some options here. I would typically try to lower it so that it's closer to the middle again, with the P. Or like I said, you can always choose not to connect it. Keep it like close by. Or you can even remove that that flourish of the P, because technically you don't really need it.
Yeah.
You know, like if you can do it like this when it's closer to it, and then now you can even connect it afterwards. Yeah. So you can certainly choose that as well as an option. Yeah. But now if you have, say, something like a bottom connector for your P or O like this, and then now you want to go all the way up for the P, sometimes you end up having like a more like awkwardly shaped connector, because of just how your P is. Then I would like straighten out that connector as much as I can. That way it's not so awkward. Yeah. Honestly, it really depends on like your vision of the letters and how you want it to look, more than anything. But yeah, cool. Okay, so that was what I wanted to cover today in terms of like connecting. Do you guys have like any like letter combinations you want me to cover, or specific?
Like LL, PP, those, and GG. Those two are those combinations with that have the same descender or ascender.
Yep.
Those are always buggers.
Yeah. Is it because you're trying to like make them look the same, or?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I'm more of I was taught more traditional, so mine is definitely different for me.
Yeah, like I definitely, for example, like for most of my whenever I do these double ones, I actually tend to make like one of them a bit larger.
Okay.
Like just because I find that people, it's almost like why people would usually slant their heads a little bit for a photo, you know?
Right.
Like with the imperfection, that's kind of like part of the look of and feel of it. The letter L is a bottom connector, exit, and bottom entry as well, right? So connecting it would be more like just like this shape. So I would do that for the letter L, right? Like keeping the connector right at the bottom here, which is just this tail itself, then starting another L.
Okay.
Yeah. And then so I'm just trying to make sure it's in focus there. Kind of looks a bit off focus. Hello. There you go. It's so weird. I feel like a makeup artist. like here. Focus. G.
Yeah, that's
G doesn't have a automatic like entry point, but it has a bottom bottom exit. So I would keep it with that same like bottom to middle, maybe like connector. And what was that third one that you said?
PP.
PP. Yeah. Yeah, P is definitely one of those because it has it could have a bottom connector at the beginning, bottom, and then it's a middle one, right? It's kind of like the S. That's what makes it difficult because of the middle connector. And also because when you're trying to keep this shape for the second P, that's when it kind of starts looking weird. So actually, one of the things that I often tell people about the letter P is to break it down into two pieces, like the J part and this like half oval piece to help with that shape. And then I would do a simple connector from a middle to the top to make those.
That doesn't give it too much space when you're writing out an entire word like happy.
Yeah, I know. But that's why like I would actually literally pause right here at the P before I finish that stroke, and then I make another P on top of it, you know?
Okay.
And that way it'll help like at least for your writing portion of it.
Okay.
So if I wrote the word happy.
You're off the screen again, honey.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for telling me.
It's okay.
I'm glad someone is telling me. Another bottom one, a top one, all the way to the top, coming to the bottom, connect it.
Okay, I guess with that descender, it doesn't make it look too spacey.
Yeah, like it depends on the size, right? Like this calligraphy style, the listen one is like a fairly narrow one. But of course, if you did like say ones that are a bit more exaggerated, like skinny letters, but big fat.
See, I like that.
Really busy.
Yeah.
But now we've got three chubby descenders next to each other. So that's the reason why I think like when you got three things next to each other, it's easier on the eyes when one of them is slightly different or in size. Right? Like right now, if I'm going to be critical about it, my H sender is not big enough. Probably need to be larger, but that's because I kind of just did that on a whim.
And see, and I would probably even take like the Y and find a way to flourish it into the P's so that it kind of brings it into like a design aspect. It's how I would normally
make this one a bit larger. Yeah, so like 1, 2, like size wise, there's like a bit of a U to it.
Right.
Something like that.
It doesn't look sure either. It doesn't look like a computer font. I hate when sometimes the letters are so perfect that they almost look computer font and people think I just typed it out.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I want it to look handwritten.
Right. I mean, it's a compliment, but yeah.
But then that means like, am I faking this or what?